Good afternoon, everyone. We just hit noon, and I am so excited to be here with Maggie Roberts. Maggie is going to be talking in session 2, workshop number 6, today about being your favorite teacher, exploring the art of great teaching. I love that title because teaching is an art, and when you see it, you know it. I'm so excited to hear some of your thoughts about that today. Many of us know Maggie. She is a member of the Ed Collaborative Network. She's an internationally recognized expert in elementary and secondary literacy, technology, integration, and content area literacy. She's a co-author of a book Tammy and I love, the popular new book, DIY Literacy, Teaching Tools for Differentiation, Rigor, and Independence. It's one we always have with us. We also feel like you're with us all the time whenever we're teaching writing, because you'll find Maggie in a lot of the Teaching Calling Readers and Writers Project Unit of Study books on teaching writing. You can also find her on the Nerdy Book Club, 2 Writing Teachers, and you can learn more about all her articles, videos, and resources at kateandmaggie.com. So if you want to follow the conversation, because we'd love to hear your thoughts as Maggie is presenting today, you can follow along on Twitter, hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, hashtag 6, because this is workshop number 6. So at this, you have to unmute your mic.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here. I always get so nervous because it feels like just me and my computer, but really it's me and many other people. So I am so glad that you stopped by today. And I already feel the energy on the previous keynotes and sessions. And so it makes this time slot really energetic and joyful because it's just riding the energy of the session so far. So this quick session is going to be about teaching. The title is Being Your Favorite Teacher, Exploring the Art of Great Teaching. And I imagine potentially when you saw that title, perhaps you thought about your favorite teacher. That was one of the hopes. And if you reflect on your favorite teacher as you settle into this session, what do you remember about him or her? What made them a favorite of yours? You know, for me, as I was planning this session, I was thinking all about Mrs. Fuller. And Mrs. Fuller was my 5th grade teacher. And I just have so many stories that go back to her. And speaking of stories, she was a storyteller. She made history and books come to life with theatrical performances and monologues and spontaneous storytelling. And she also was a coach. I mean, there was a bit of Miss Fuller that was very no nonsense. And she pushed us 5th graders to practice a lot. I remember being in book clubs in her classroom, which now in retrospect is really interesting because it was a bit ago. And she was pushing us to practice independently by kind of drifting over and giving us a couple of coaching moves and then drifting to another group. And so when you reflect on your own Mrs. Fuller, whoever your favorite teacher is in this moment in time, chances are it wasn't necessarily the teaching method that made him or her memorable. You know, like I think, man, Miss Fuller's guided practice was awesome. Like I don't think like that's what makes her iconic in my memory of great teachers. I think that chances are you remember how you felt with them, the magic he or she had. Their persona was probably a little bit bigger than life. And so today we're going to talk about teaching. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the art of teaching. And when we talk about the art of teaching, what do we mean? And how do we as a collective of educators teach teaching, right? How do we as a collective invite people into this profession from any ages or any background and teach the art of teaching? And so there's a lot of ways that we talk about teaching in our field. And in a sense, there's a ton of ways that we teach teaching. One is that we we'll think a lot about methods of effective teaching. This is something that I get really excited about, is going into classroom and experimenting with different methods of teaching, things like demonstration or guided practice or inquiry. A second way I feel like we talk a lot about teaching are teaching frameworks, like workshop teaching or project-based learning. A third is just great teacher stuff, right? Anything from a philosophy that you use, or more so a scripted program, or a book you like to teach, or basils, or whatever is your jam when you're thinking about the teaching stuff. What do you teach? And as my mind drifted on those three things, like when we talk about teaching, we think about methods, we think about frameworks, we think about stuff. There are lots of organizations out there that teach teaching. And they take on this hugely important work of how, as a collective of educators, we kind of teach this art of teaching. They have this responsibility of sculpting future educators and innovating and strengthening the educational system. There are undergraduate and graduate educational programs. There are amazing organizations like UTEP in Chicago and the Fellows in New York City. I was a part of two organizations that helped me fall in love with this profession and continue on, and that was the New Teachers Center that was based at the time out of the University of Chicago, and the Golden Apple Scholars Program of Illinois. And when I think about those organizations, they both have a high percentage of teachers staying in the field of teaching. And because I wanted to do a talk on great teaching, I took myself back to one of those programs. I thought to myself, is it the stuff that they taught that kept such a high percentage? Is it the framework they used? Is it the methods? And so I'm going to take you on a little journey into the Golden Apple Scholars Program in Illinois. And at the time, it took 60 high school seniors from all across the state of Illinois, and it provided them a 4-year summer intensive program that every summer in between your undergraduate year, you would go and study teaching. And they paid for state tuition. And we worked in Illinois in a school of need for 5 years or more. And during those summers, we interned in the Chicago public school system in their summer school program. And we were in seminars in the afternoon with master teachers. And I kept all my notebooks. We're teachers, we keep things. And I was reading through the notebooks, and I saw that we learned a ton. We learned a lot of content. There's a lot of math inquiry and science. We studied pedagogy, social justice education, cultural literacies, and we studied methods of teaching for sure. We would be in workshops and inquiry. But it feels like really what I learned is that I was surrounded by these master teachers. And it was a wide range of master teachers. They put the magic behind the methods. It was Kathy Wandrow, and she was a storyteller. It was Greg Mitchie, and he was a coach. It was Jane Urist, and she was an artist. And Doc Emil Haberlin of DuSable High School, he was a scientist. And nearly 20 years later, when I think about great teaching, this is what I remember. I remember these archetypes of mentor master teachers. And so this is today's workshop. We're going to study 3 archetypes of great teachers with the intent to do a couple of things. 1, understand that archetype or identity as a teacher and its purpose. 2, when it might be useful. And 3, how to teach with that identity, like how it can be helpful. And so it's my hope that some of these teaching identities can put the magic behind your methods of teaching, and put the magic behind the stuff you teach, and put the magic inside the framework that you inhabit, and that we can tap into these archetypes at purposeful moments during our lessons or our units, so that the whole goal is to help kids remember, help kids engage, and help them take on their own learning. The whole goal is to have a kid 20 years later not exactly remember what you taught, but perhaps how you taught and what you embodied. So let's talk about, I feel like, kind of to organize our notes and our thinking together, I'll go ahead and talk out 3 different archetypes. And at the end of each little mini session, I have a slide that will cover a lot of the content and will give you a little time to process. And the first archetype I wanted to start with is the storyteller. Okay, the storyteller, we're going to be thinking about for the next few minutes, teaching as a performance art. Okay, teaching as a performance art. And so when we think about the storyteller, when I thought about, the storytellers that were the teachers in my history, and when I think about storytelling in general, if I did kind of a random list of association, I think of the Norican Poets Cafe, I think of the Moth Story Hour, I think about my uncle telling stories into all hours of the night at the Thanksgiving dinner table. My religious leaders growing up were epic storytellers, and even my obsession with Mad Men, the the series, and just how much of those men and women were storytellers within advertisement. And it's not new to say that stories captivate us. Stories bring us in and they teach us something. And so when we think about how embodying the storyteller as we're teaching can be helpful, it can be helpful to specifically engage students. It can be a helpful identity to tap into when we want to create a big impact. And third, to kind of create attachment to that work. So let's talk how-tos, right? How to be the storyteller. Because at one point you can just be like, I'm gonna be my uncle right now, and I'm gonna kind of channel him, or I'm gonna channel Kathy Wandrow and begin my lesson this way. But there are so many strategies if you're not the storyteller that keeps people at the edge of their seats at the Thanksgiving dinner table. You too can still embrace this kind of archetype of teaching. So here's one of my favorite ways I want to share with you. Leadership expert Simon Sinek, he outlines a certain strategy when applied to marketing a product. And that strategy is the golden circle strategy. And so I'm going to imagine applying this strategy to help me become a storyteller as I teach my content, which is writing, right? I'm a writing teacher a lot of the time. And so if my product is teaching a writing strategy, or if my product is teaching a time period in history or a text in reading, Simon says the first thing that you do, and it's in 3 steps, which is why I like it. Power of 3. Step 1, hook your audience. In this case, it's the students. And you first introduce your strategy. No, let me take that back. Okay. First, hook your audience, which are the students, and do that first, and introduce your strategy second. Second step, as you're storytelling, the whole goal is to build suspense, bring people in, edge of their seats. Step 3, focus our story on the students successfully using our strategy. Okay, so number 1, I'm going to hook my audience with a story. I'm then going to introduce the strategy second. As I'm storytelling, I'm going to build suspense. And my whole goal is to see if I can focus my story on students successfully trying that strategy. Okay, so I wanted to, in this room alone with all of you together, I wanted just to practice that to see if I could see what that sounds like. And it will be nice to have it on tape too, to go back and look and see how I can make it better. But I was thinking if I was using this storytelling strategy, I might use it when I teach writing, when I am introducing a writing strategy. And what I could say is, friends, we've been writing real stories about our lives, and we're at the point where we are writing the scene that contains the climax of our story, or the turning point in your story. And so today I want to teach you this strategy to make it better. Right? It's a totally fine way to start out my lesson. But if I embrace the storyteller and this golden circle strategy, it might sound something like this. So friends, last night I was putting my kids to bed, and there's starting to be a chill in the air up here in New England. And so when they went to bed, I went down in the basement to grab a Tupperware of coats to bring up. And the light bulb had burned out, and I hate changing light bulbs. And so I had gone into this basement countless times. And so I knew my way around. So I just went forth and went down into the basement in the dark to grab this Tupperware of coats. And it was pitch black. I walked down the stairs and something rustled in the corner. I squinted, I stopped to listen, and there was nothing. So I continued down the stairs. It's the water heater, I mumbled. It happened again, the rustling. So I stopped. There, 2 eyes lit up. They moved. Okay. So if your heart is racing or you're feeling a little bit of the EBGs, you should, right? In a moment, I'm going to tell you what it was. But before I do, there is something that I did as a writer to make your heart race. One, it's a creepy cat story. But number 2, I used, as I was approaching this moment of finding the 2 eyes, simple, strong sentences as I approached the trouble in my story. It was kind of like, dun-dun, 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 dun-dun. So friends, as you're working today and writing the scene really intensely, helping the reader get set up for your turning point in your story, you could think about tapping into simple sentences, because it's a way to create a rhythm in your piece that builds tension. Okay, right, so it's like me giving it a go. I'm embracing the storyteller. My whole goal is to engage and to create an impact and get an attachment to the work. And I have done plenty of sentence structure lessons that have completely bombed and are not very engaging. And so this might be a nice place to tap into that of hooking with story. And in my research around kind of master storytellers, I found 5 tips to make our storytelling great. And I'm going to put those up with our storytelling slide and kind of talk about that so that you can also organize the information and do some thinking. So tip number 1 from master storytellers, right? Grab attention and go, right? That there is a super duper importance of creating a strong beginning as a storyteller. And if you think about this as my Mad Men obsession, and especially how advertising works now in our social media feeds, if you don't get the audience in the first, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure advertisers out there know, in the first couple of seconds, the consumer might scroll on. And so with a story, really thinking about cutting to the chase and grabbing attention and go. Second tip, find the twist, right? That great stories will have some sort of twist of events. We as a country are obsessed with the show This Is Us. And I haven't watched it yet because life, but it's on my list of things to watch. And what I do know about it is that it created ripples for the twists it has in its storytelling. And so if we're tapping into this strategy of great teaching, I want to start off strong and I want to see if my story can have a twist. Third is to embrace failure, right? It's the ugly stories that teach us lessons. And so that storytelling, we want to hit on all ranges of emotions with our students as we storytell to set up our product, right, which is our content or our strategies. And we can tap into just a variety of emotional fields, right, like fear and disappointment and, love and happiness, sadness. Let's go ahead and put up the slide 2, and then I'll do the 2 other tips here. I'm going to share my entire screen. All right, so I'm here in white, right? We're going to embrace our failures. When we're using storytelling as a teaching strategy, we want to make sure that we, in our stories, remember that great stories have problems and ways to overcome that problem. So presenting the trouble and the solutions. And those solutions don't mean to be like troubles fixed, right? Like the solution to the 2 eyes that I saw in my basement may not have ended up me becoming best friends with the creature that was down there. So the solution doesn't have to be this like hunky-dory moment, but it is, the brain craves completion. And so when we're storytelling, kind of giving students kind of that closure to it. And then the 5th tip is think memoir, not biography, right? That when we're using storytelling as a strategy of great teaching, there is this real power of leaving something out. Otherwise, I think, we could talk about, sometimes when I get lost in this archetype a bit, I find myself, I'm telling too much of the story, right? That it's really purposeful. So I'm going to leave up this slide for a moment of think time, or if you're watching this with colleagues, talk time, just so that you can capture some of this thinking around storytelling as teaching as a performance art. And maybe you just think back to your past week of teaching when you did use this archetype, either knowingly or unknowingly. How you could have used this archetype to set up some content you were teaching. What would be your story, right? How might it go? Okay. Okay, I should be back here. Okay, so some of you noticed that my original title for this workshop was included the phrase clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. And I immediately am your best friend if you know that reference. This is going to set up our second section, or a second archetype that we're going to explore together, which is the coach, right? Teaching as mentorship. Okay, so we've got the storyteller, teaching as a performance art. We've got the coach, teaching as mentorship. And so let's think about what it is, right? When I think of coaches, I immediately think of Coach Taylor. Like this character is like a real person in my life, right? Coach Taylor is from Friday Night Lights. And when I think about Coach Taylor and all that he embodies as a coach, I feel like he would say he's a leader, he's a teacher, he's a disciplinarian, he's a friend, he's a mentor, perhaps even a therapist at times, right? And so embodying the identity of a coach. And in full transparency, I really think about like sports coaches. It's just something that speaks to me. So when I'm thinking about kind of coaches as sports, and when that might be a helpful archetype to tap into, one is when I, as a teacher, want to encourage a lot of practice and application. When I want to develop individual goals or plans for a kid or some small groups of kids. And third, this might be a really nice archetype to tap into to build camaraderie and energy in the room. I mean, when Coach Taylor is giving the speeches in the halftime locker room, like, I am there. I'm ready to charge out my front door like I'm charging out onto the field. I am 100% there. So let's talk about strategies to embrace and teach like a coach. So we're going to step into the shoes of a famous swim coach. He coached someone, you may not have heard of him, Michael Phelps. He's kind of like this, like, mediocre swimmer. And his coach, Bob Bowman, he talks about 3 strategies that he uses as a coach that I feel like we can take on in our classrooms. One, we have to know what we teach. And we have to know lots of ways to get there. right? So I need to know what I want to teach and lots of ways to go there. He says in an interview, he says, you can't have a cookie cutter approach. I've been much more of a successful coach now as I've added to my toolbox, right? When Bob first started, the only tool in his toolbox was a hammer as a coach. And he noted that not many people responded to that approach. And so Bowman expanded his skills to work on with a variety of athletes. He said things like, some people respond to logic. Some players respond to motivation. Some players respond to just honestly being left alone to play. But as a teacher, you know, if I am teaching a concept in writing, if writing is my touchstone throughout this talk, I want to know that I want to teach indenting and loving paragraphs. And I do know as a coach, I want to have a lot of ways to get there, a lot of ways to help kids get there. So one strategy is to know what we're teaching and lots of ways in to that work. Second tip this swim coach gives is do the work of your teaching, right? That we see what we know. And so if I haven't played the sport, it's hard for me to see and know the nuances, right? So I was born and raised in the Midwest. I do know a lot about football. And when I watch a football game, I know so much. It's not like I played the game, but I know so much of it that I can see a lot, right? I can say that that player is inches from the first down. But if I watch baseball, which I don't know a ton about, and I never played, I don't have much to say when I watch that sport, or if I were to coach that sport. Like I might be like, nice hit. That was good running. So, and I feel like we know this instinctually, right? That kids can get a sense pretty quickly if we've walked the walk in our classroom. Donna Santman is a middle school teacher among many things, and is kind of is a real intellectual mentor for me as a middle school teacher. In her talks, she'll say that she has never taught a lesson that she hasn't tried herself, and I think that that's really key to teaching as a coach. The third strategy is that to know and be really clear to kids that they can outgrow themselves daily, right? Bowman says, be a little better today than you were yesterday. And if you do that enough days, you've traveled a great distance. So let's do an example. I was working in a school in Massachusetts outside of Boston a couple of days ago, actually, and we were going to teach our lesson after we had kids do a little bit of writing. We were just kind of disrupting their structure of workshop and getting them to write a little bit, having our lesson, a couple minutes into the day. And so we set the kids up to either continue writing their entries in their notebook, they're writing stories, so continue writing the story in their life, to write it again, or to write a new story. And the only non-negotiable was to write better than you did the day before, because you are a better writer today than you were yesterday, even if it's by this little bit. And we use, the teachers and I use that language with the students, and it happens so soon that I don't have his writing sample yet, but a student named Joss, really took that on to the point that before our lesson, we had to really stop and read his yesterday's entry and his today's entry, because it was just better. And I think a part of that is that there was like a lot of teachers in the room, like studying the kids, but I also feel like, it was that coach in us saying, you are better today than you were yesterday. Even if you're not better, you're a different writer today than you were yesterday. Let's see it. And allowing kids that opportunity. So in studying master coaches, if you will, these were 5 big tips I came across again and again and again. And again, I'll put up a slide for you. So these were curated by Sarah Green Carmichael in the Harvard Business Review. And she curated these tips from master coaches. Number one, lead by example, right? Joe Girardi says you have to lead by example. You ask your players to be mentally and physically prepared, so you need to be prepared. Number two, encourage or value encouragement before critique. And when the critique happens, great coaches will say, give that feedback right away. Soccer coach Sir Alex Ferguson says, few people will get better with criticism. Most respond to encouragement instead. So I tried to give encouragement when I could. For a player, for any human being, there is nothing better than hearing the words, well done. Those are the two best words ever invented. You don't need superlatives, right? And Ferguson goes on to say, when you do need to give feedback, we have to give it right away, right? That after, while the kids are playing the game, I don't wait till the next weekend to give them the feedback. I tell them immediately, right as the game is being played. So one, lead by example. Two, value encouragement before critique. And when we do give critique, we give it in the moment. Coaches will say, tip three, be honest, be direct, and be sensitive and compassionate, right? So Bill Parcells have said, I have had many players come back to me 10 years later and thank me for putting some pressure on them. They say that what they remember about me most of the time is one line. I think you're better than you think you are, right? So, it makes me think in my teaching, when I pull up alongside of a kid, if I'm having a quick writing conference with them, I want to use that moment to be honest, to name it, and name it in a way that is both compassionate, direct, and sensitive. Let's take a look at a couple more tips here. Right? Be honest, be direct, be sensitive, and compassionate. Tip number 4, great coaches will say to remember the underperforming in that moment, right? Your team is only as good as your weakest member. Bill Walsh has said that the difference between winning and losing is the bottom 25% of your people, right? That most coaches can deliver to the top 75%, but the last 25% only blossoms in the details, in the orchestration of skills, and in the way that you prepare. Tip number 5, make progress tangible, right? That we need to set clear goals. Great coaches will set clear goals and milestones, and they'll celebrate them when we hit them. Teaching as mentorship. So again, I'll have a moment of think time. For me, I'm thinking about my coaches. I was a swimmer, and I coached with a coach who had swum in the Olympic trials. You might be thinking about a coach in your life, but also just why coaching can be helpful, right? It can be really helpful to get kids to practice. It can be really helpful to build camaraderie and energy in the room. And then I might think back to last week. For me, I was in Massachusetts. For you, you were where you were. And you might think about a time that you embraced this archetype as coach and how it helped, places that you could have embraced this archetype. Let's close out our third, right? Teaching as a storyteller, teaching as a coach. Let's talk about the scientist, teaching as inquiry. When we think about scientists, things that come in mind are inquiry and questioning, analyzing data and looking for patterns. Great scientists solve problems and they set up experiments for the unknowns. And this archetype, this identity as a teacher can be helpful when I really want to help my students layer their thinking and create meaning, when I want to encourage self-directed learning, and when I want to promote critical thinking. There are lots of strategies to teach like a scientist and to view teaching as inquiry. Here are a few of my favorites. Strategy number 1, create opportunities for thought and the active pursuit of knowledge. There is a professor at Stanford, Dr. Long, who, when giving a lecture, she'll give out lecture notes with blank parts in the most critical parts of her lecture. So she's setting up the active pursuit of unknown knowledge at really critical points in her content. Strategy 2, vary the kinds of inquiry questions, right? That some questions seek facts and measure recall, but others demand all sorts of things like higher level reasoning skills, such as elaboration or explaining a concept. Other questions will set us up to compare and contrast or hypothesize an outcome. Questions will speculate cause and effect. Right, so strategy 2, really thinking about varying the types of inquiry questions I set kids up to do in my classroom. The third, we could think about the see, think, wonder strategy, right? So when I think about that work, I'm drawn to my mentors, Harvey Daniels and Sarah Ahmed and Kristen Zemke, and thinking about the see, think, wonder thinking routine, how that thinking routine stresses the importance of an inquiry-based thinking through close observations I see, and followed by a step-by-step process of what do I think and what do I wonder. And so if I think about, if I think about teaching like a scientist as I teach writing, in this work of inquiry and looking for patterns, seeking knowledge, you know, perhaps it's like right now it's in the beginning of the year. So when I'm working with teachers, a lot of our students are writing narratives or memoir or story. And we do want kids to be able to write a story or from their lives or imagined that conveys a theme or a message or as a heartbeat to the piece. And I feel like if I was taking on the persona of a scientist, I'd want to really imagine different possibilities of what a theme or lesson might be from this short story I'm writing about my life. And so I might push kids to say, well, perhaps this is a story about being different. Or perhaps this is a story about fitting in. Or perhaps this is a story about taking a risk and losing and still being okay. But this idea that I'm taking this inquisitive stance and writing it one way or writing it another way, that feels like a concrete way I could take on this role of inquisitive, truth-seeking scientist. Let's begin to close with 5 tips from master scientists, right? Tip number 1, it was all over the place, use demonstration whenever possible. These aren't my words, but demonstrations are the place in between science and magic. Don't you love that, right? Demonstrations are the space in between science and magic. And giving lots of demonstrations, whatever we teach, can help give kids clear procedural steps. Tip number 2, use questions to build confidence rather than using questions to induce fear. Right? That questions are good things, unknowns are great things, that a strategy is to have kids potentially propose different answers to one question or perhaps different questions to one topic. Tip number 3, use dual coding, right? Combining words and visuals, coming up with lots of ways to represent information, diagrams or comic strips, infographics, timelines. Let's get up that slide so we can anchor ourselves to a visual, speaking of dual coding here. Number 4, try focused listing, right? Focused listing involves asking students to produce a list in response to a specific question. For example, list as many biological characteristics of the human heartbeat as you can, right? That will quickly generate a large number of responses from the class, right? So if I'm thinking about, create a focus list of all the possible themes that you can imagine in this short story, or possible themes that you want to convey in your piece of writing. And then the fifth that did come up a lot was think, pair, share, right? In the context of tried and true methods of scientists, that we can reconstruct prior knowledge based on new experiences and new learning. And that when I think and I pair up and I share, that share is not just repetition, but it's reconstruction of prior knowledge based on new learning, based on what other people are thinking about. And it's fun, this work, and playful because, it helps at least me think about what archetypes are a little bit more natural for me as a teacher, what archetypes are more challenging, what units kind of beckon a different kind of voice. We did 3, but there are lots of others that we could think about, right? That a fourth archetype is the artist, teaching as exploration. My aunt Linda has been an art educator for 30 plus years, and when she teaches, she's in a studio and asking kids as young as 2 and 3 just to be in the paint, just to be in the material and explore. When can I harness her in my teaching? The activist, teaching as an action. The therapist, teaching as listening. The architect, teaching as design. I think about those teachers that set up space in a way that just runs the classroom. My toddler is just beginning pre-K, and I just sit and admire these teachers' classrooms and how they're trained and skilled to set up a room that beckons learning. So, hi. I want to end with a quote, teacher, and it's from the first book of an exceptional book about the art and exploration of teaching, and it's aptly titled "To Teach" by Bill Ayers. One thing becomes clear enough: teaching as the direct delivery of some pre-planned curriculum, teaching as the orderly and scripted conveyance of information, teaching as clerking is simply a myth. Teaching is much larger and more alive than that. It contains more pain and conflict, more joy and intelligence, more uncertainty and ambiguity. It requires more judgment and energy and intensity than on some days seems humanly possible. Teaching is spectacularly unlimited. So teaching, albeit all-encompassing, is something that we can work on, whether we're year 1 or year 41 in this profession. And there are practical ways to find this magic behind the methods and embody our favorite teachers of our past. Whether we're building a unit or a week or a day, it's fun to play and think about these identities in mind as they can connect to the goals that you have for the students in your classroom. My hope is that at the close of this workshop, you feel a tiny sense of freedom and fun and unlimited possibilities when we talk about nurturing our profession that we hold so close to our hearts, that we are sitting in our pajamas on a Saturday doing our own learning together. So whether you're the storyteller, the scientist, or the coach, thank you so much for your time. I'd love to stay in touch.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know everyone watching, as well as myself, is so overwhelmed by your presentation. The reminder to all of us to take the time to examine and honor teaching. The moves that we make as teachers that cause our students to feel and to engage and to live right, their lives and to be a part of their own learning. So I know there were so many times I couldn't tweet because I was really so engaged in your story. I tried my best. But I think you gave us so much to think about today and others at the end, but teachers as storytellers, coaches, and scientists. So this is definitely one I think many of us will be watching again and again. There was so much to it.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Up next, we have a quick break. People can get some food and join us next. For session 3. I'm trying to see my session 3, which I can't. Anybody else see my session 3? Maggie, can you see my? Oh, there it is. For session 3, from 1 to 1:45, Rachel will be joining us and talking about demonstrating and finding key ingredients of effective literacy instruction. And Chris Lehman will be presenting some ideas about learning with the Educator Collaborative in the upcoming year, Literacy to Build a World Where Every Learner Thrives. So thanks everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in 15 minutes for our next session. In the meantime, don't forget to pay forward with the Edge Your Joy and think about possibly donating to one of the many charities that we're thinking about honoring today. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.